into another episode of Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckalter. Follow me on Twitter at JoshGBuck. Hit up the Facebook page, Clocker Sports, the website, clockersports.com, and the email address is clockersports@gmail.com. Start off the show with a little bit of a different kind of a topic. Still sports related, but it's more of a person who is involved in the sports world, sports media to be precise, and that is ESPN's Rachel Nichols. She was recently the victim of a peeping Tom. As we all know, they are down in the Orlando bubble trying to prepare for the NBA season to return, and Nichols found herself being spied upon by, I'm not sure whether if it's an employee right now, but from what we've been told, it was a Deadspin article. Somebody recorded her, sent it to Deadspin, and now, now you have what you have there as far as she's been the feed of her not being aware. She's caught discussing careers of her career, colleagues, the decision-making process at ESPN, and things of that nature. So clearly that's not something that she wants to get out, but it's out there. It was, I'm not sure if it's a hacker. I believe that they said the stream came from her TV show that's in the remote setup in her hotel room. So just a really creepy story. Surprising that this is the first major scandal, and I'm not trying to make light of it at all. It's horrible. It's a shock. I did not think that. Now we know that this is not the first time something like this has happened. You remember in 2008, Erin Andrews was recorded in her room by somebody who eventually got arrested and did a couple years in prison. But this is somebody accessing the feed. Again, it sounds like it's an employee. But yeah, and sending the files over, or the footage over, and trying to portray her as a backstabber and a false ally due to the conversation. According to Deadspin, who will not publish the video, nor will they really describe the conversation in any detail, did say that nothing that they heard would lead them to believe that that's what Nichols was doing in any way, shape, or form. So just something to keep an eye on. A weird story. Obviously, it's been a weird year. 2020 has been a wild boy. So I'm not surprised that something wild happened, but I'm surprised that this wild thing happened, because it just doesn't seem. It's just a weird thing, man. Moving on to some other, I don't want to say uplifting news, but it's definitely nice to see. Jeremy Grant was speaking to reporters, and in his video presser, he was asked multiple questions about teammates, Nikola Jokic's arrival, and his preparedness and all that kind of stuff. And all he kept responding with was, "It's great to be here with my teammates. I love these guys," basically. But let's keep the focus on Breonna Taylor and her killers and stuff. And I mean, like, it was different variations of that. His coach praised him for it, commended him for, I don't want to say praise, that's probably strong, but he commended him for sticking on message. And I commend him for sticking on message, because, and we've seen it. We talked about it last episode with Deshaun Watson and Steven Jackson's stupid comments, that this is, it's very easy for these things to get brushed by the wayside, because people get, the news cycle is only 48 hours at the most. People are always looking for the next thing to talk about. And there are, let's face it, some people that don't want this to be the focus. So there's a lot working against it, and not nearly enough to, not nearly enough keeping the focus where where it needs to be, and that is on figuring out, bringing the killers of Breonna Taylor to justice. So arrest those cops. In other news, the last time we talked, was it last time? Maybe a couple episodes before that. But we had recently talked about Victor Oladipo and being the finesser of the year in the NBA for traveling with his team down to the Orlando bubble, though he had already determined that he was not going to be playing. But that enabled him to collect a paycheck. Well, according to Victor Oladipo now, after being down there with the teammates and running a couple of practices with no restrictions, he's feeling like he could possibly play. And obviously the Pacers would like to have that. The league would like to have it, because then he wouldn't be the loophole guy who's getting paid while not playing, because he was supposed, there's a whole fight now as it stands between the league and the PA, who would like, the PA obviously wants him to get all of his money, but it's about, I think, a $3 million difference. And the NBA, obviously, for obvious reasons, is trying not to. This would eliminate that, obviously, if he was to be able to suit up. The thing is, though, when I wrote the piece for clockersports.com, go ahead and check that out. I actually said that there's really no reason for him to play. He's going to have one more year in his contract. Listen, Indiana's a scrappy bunch. They ain't winning no championship, okay? Vic's gonna have to think long and hard about his future, and he says he's doing so, and he's not doing anything that his body won't allow him to do. And he really went into a kind of Kawhi Leonard-esque description of his quad injury, and that there's nobody of his ability and nobody who has had quite that injury, which is, it may very well be true, but reading it out in typed is just weird. It just read like a very Kawhi-esque when he was going through his whole ordeal with the San Antonio Spurs type of situation where maybe there's a little bit more to it that we don't know. Remember, he and the Pacers reportedly, according to beat reporter Scott Agnes, that he said that the Pacers and Oladipo kind of had a strained relationship in the beginning, but it's kind of worked its way out now. That being the case, I get Vic trying to, he wants to play for his team, but guys want to play. That makes perfect sense. But you got to be realistic. You're not winning no ship. And if you're not winning no ship, there's no reason for him to risk further injuring himself and risking a massive payday. Now, the flip side of that is, let's say he plays and they make some kind of noise. Maybe they're not winning it again. They're not winning at all, but they could get to the second round, right? And do some damage to whatever team they face there. I don't know about them making the Eastern Conference Finals, but they could do some damage in the second round. So does that help him at all? I think that's the balance here. Does he lose much by not playing since March? Does he lose more from that than he does gain by playing in a few games when they're ultimately not going to end up hoisting a trophy? That's going to be his ultimate decision, and one that I think that is probably a lot tougher than we might want to initially believe, because, again, they want to play. Nobody's denying that these guys want to go out and play. But for Depot, especially considering the fact that he was already skeptical before, to go down there now after a couple of days and say, hey, I'm feeling good, that's fine. I just don't know if it's I can't speak for him, obviously, but I would say that if I was in that position, I think I would have to try to go more for the trying to maintain my health and make sure that I don't get trapped playing in that injury game, trying to make up for lost time. Boogie Cousins is a guy that I think about a lot, especially now going forward with injuries. 2 years in a row, he's tried to kind of rush himself back, and his body wasn't fully right, and ended up suffering further injuries, thus further removing him from a big payday. You don't even really talk. We're talking about Boogie on 1-year deals to help a team that might, could use his assistance in the playoffs. We were talking about Boogie as a max guy, possible franchise cornerstone, or a very good Robin at worst, right? And now we're kind of just wondering exactly what it is that you're going to get out of Boogie next time you see him. Multiple injuries. He's been, it's leg injuries at that. It's something to keep him focused on for Victor Oladipo. Like I said, he's facing a major payday in the next year. Now we'll see how the cap and all that kind of stuff works out, with COVID taking a toll on everybody's revenue this season coming up. I mean, every league is going to take a hit, but particularly NBA and MLB with no fans in the building. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects him going forward down in 2021. But maybe that's why he's opting to possibly play. Maybe he's, looking long term and seeing that there might not be that money down the road. He would rather further ingratiate himself to the organization in Indiana and possibly get a little bit extra than he would have gotten from them if any other circumstances. It's a very fluid situation. Obviously, he hasn't firmly decided, but like, you've had Michael Beasley, who got signed by the Nets and got sent back because he had COVID. Like, there's a lot of other things riding on this, right? Not just the money thing, but the deadline. Like, I don't know what they're going to do. I think they're past the ability to add anybody if he were to actually end up sitting. So, and they wouldn't have got it anyway because he came down there. So it's wild. It's wild to see, because, like I said, I wrote an entire article about the man being the finesser of the year. I stand by it at this point. But yeah, the consideration to go back in, I think if somebody who were not part of the Pacers but had Vic's best interest at heart were able to, pull him to the side, they would tell him, "Hey, man, don't do it. It's just not worth it. There's going to be, I fear that we're going to see a heightened number of injuries, soft tissue injuries, as guys have kind of been, they haven't been laying around. I'm sure a lot of them have been staying in shape, but the kind of activity that they're about to be doing, it's just not the same. You can't simulate live game action 100% in a practice situation, and they weren't even having that up until recently, right? And this is not even talking about potential risk from coronavirus. This is literally just like physical, they happen all the time type injuries. Oladipo, I think, is while he's healthy, I would have a hard time, again, as a person, if I was advising him, I would have a hard time saying, hey, man, go ahead and suit up for this team that probably isn't going to win a championship. Again, playoff performances, though, speak volumes, and people will pay you for that, too. So I get it. I just, man, Vic, man, you was a finesser, bro. You had it. Now you out here waffling. It's all right. Like I said, I get it, man. Guys want to play it, and if he's feeling good, it would be they're an exciting team to watch. Like I said, second round probably exit, but that second round damn near goes 7 games. They're dead. I think they're that kind of a tough team. They got trees in the front court, and you got some very versatile backcourt players. So keep an eye on the Pacers, not for a championship, but for what's happening with Victor Oladipo. Again, if they got him, watch out for whoever they have to face in the second round. That's all I can say about that. Now, wrap up the basketball section talking about the hometown Bulls. And this is not what I wanted to be talking about, this particular bit of, I don't want to say news, but information. Now, I recently did an interview with Tony Gill, producer of the Bulls Talk podcast for NBC Sports Chicago, and in that conversation we broached the subject of Jim Boylen. And Tony's major message was patience. The organization, namely Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley, are taking their time to do their due diligence and are going to execute a plan that they see fit. Beat writers, Casey Johnson, Joe Cowley, they're telling us that it's more of a matter of, especially Cowley, but it's more a matter of when and not if. Well, Boylen came out today saying that he thinks he has a good working relationship with his bosses, and he started talking about development of guys, and he was saying next year. Now, if you've been following the situation, the Bulls front office, Karnisovas and Eversley, were brought in, and I mean, like, Karnisovas was brought in, and it was just like a whirlwind of front office changes. Pax was out of there, Gar was out of there, trainers are fired, you brought in capologists, right? But then they kind of just halted to a stop with Boylen. And then the rumor started flying out between it being, oh, this is Reinsdorf and maybe even a little bit of Pax, but definitely Reinsdorf trying to keep his guy Jim around, because Jim Boylen is in the good graces of ownership, and I believe, the belief is of Paxson, who's now in an advisory role. That's kind of scary. But the thing about it is, I brought this up with Tony. I'm not sure what else there is to see, and I gave an entire list. If you want to hear the list of statistics, and it wasn't a lengthy one, but if you want to hear it, and even if you don't want to hear it, but you want to hear the rest of the interview, go check that interview out with Tony Gill on any of your major platforms, just like this one. But I told him, like, there's a laundry list of reasons to not bring him back, and the list to bring him back is not nearly as lengthy. And on top of that, it's not like Boylen just got here in 2018, right? They didn't fire Hoiberg and then bring Boylen off the street. Boylen had been with the assistant head coach, since 2015. That's a long time. I'm not sure. Now, in his defense, in Boylen's defense, Tony brought up that Eversley and Karnisovas weren't there, so they don't know him like that. While it's familiar to us, it's me in particular, but Bulls fans, it's not as particular to a guy in another front office who has to run an organization. I'm sure he focused on a lot of other things rather than what the Bulls front office was looking like, or the Bulls head coach situation. Now, that being said, it was very well publicized, and I'm talking about so much so that you had Kings players cracking jokes. So, and this is the beginning. It didn't get better. So I won't completely dismiss that, but I can't completely accept it either, because I know that the West Coast got the information, right? So somebody along the way had to relay it. I can't say that Karnisovas and Eversley were actually paying attention to it, though. So, but the scary part here is that it's looking ever likely that there's a good chance that we see some Boylen next year. I don't think anybody any reasonable person would expect that. But the signs are there. He's still around. There's a shortfall. I mean, you had Reinsdorf complaining about he was losing money in the 9-digit range, which is terrible. But I mean, I'm not sniffing that range, so I can't really get fully on board. But like, oh my gosh, poor Jerry. So some people are speculating that might be why they don't want to cut Jim Boylen out, want to fire him. Excuse me, but his salary is like 30th in the NBA. Like he and they paid most of it already, so I don't think that would be an issue. We know about the image thing. Rick Carlisle, head coach of the Dallas Mavericks, also the president of the Coaches Association, was telling coaches to avoid the Bulls because they have a history of unceremoniously firing coaches, including doing so on holidays and physical altercations too, which is funny that that's not being more publicized with all of this other stuff, but it's definitely in the history books. So they're trying to work a couple of angles here, maybe appease the bosses a little bit, maybe actually do a little bit more research with Jim Boylen, who, shouts out to him, was very active in protests last weekend. So good on Jim for that. But the other prevailing thought is that they are trying to save face with the rest of the NBA and not be those guys. Here's my argument against that, and I didn't bring this up to Tony, but we talked about a few other arguments against it. But one of them is you do yourself a disservice if the entire time the thought was you were going to be bringing in your own guys, and then you stop there when we all know the ties aren't to the new regime. They're definitely to the old regime. And on top of that, we know that there's so many other moving parts around, right? So you have to wonder, could there be a head coach candidate in the playoffs right now that the Bulls are waiting on? We know that the bubble was coming. Maybe they wanted to see Jim Boylen. I don't know what they're going to find out in those 8 games that likely wouldn't have the full complement of starters. But there seems to be this overwhelming desire to keep him around, and they're just stalling. And in Casey Johnson's mailbag, he even mentioned that there was a lot of questions about Boylen and kind of bringing up a lot of what he did that was good, like improving the defense, and it really wasn't that great, but I got where he was going with it. There's just a lot of signs here that kind of lead me to believe that there's a much better chance than anybody wants to admit publicly that we have Jim Boylen coaching the Chicago Bulls next season. And if that's the case, Jesus be offense. Because, oh my gosh, that's just not what, oh my gosh. That would be a joke, because that would prove that the Bulls are running themselves like a expansion team. That would prove that Eversley and Karnisovas doesn't have the autonomy that we were told that he has. That Eversley doesn't have, or I'm sorry, I keep trying to do that. Sorry about that. Had a few technical difficulties, but we are back. As I was speaking on the Mark Eversley and Jim Boylen situation, so we were led to believe that Karnisovas had autonomy to run his organization as he sees fit. This would be a proof positive that he doesn't. That the Reinsdorfs are at least still running some things, or possibly even John Paxson has some pull that we didn't want to admit. That's a terrifying thought, and it's definitely not going to help the Bulls pull off the ultimate move that they think they're going to be able to pull off. If not this summer, but very soon, what they're trying to set themselves up for, and what, honestly, the Chicago Bears, who we'll talk about shortly, have a really good chance of pulling off. That's going to do it for this segment of the Triple Zeros show. That's going to do it for this segment. We're going to switch gears in a moment, take a quick break talking about the NBA. We're going to come back, talk about the NFL. That's going to do it for this segment of Triple Zeros. Going to come back, take a quick break. Wow, I am really stumbling over this one, huh? Let's try that one more time. Going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we're going to switch gears talking about the NFL franchise deadline passed, and woo, There was a lot of movement, man. I'm not sure that people are ready to discuss what came out of that, the fallout that could be coming from that, but I am. So don't go anywhere. 000's BRB. As a defensive end rather than linebacker. Same thing goes for Bud Dupree with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We kind of remember this situation, especially with Jimmy Graham trying to do the paid as a wide receiver. Was it wide receiver or weapon that he wanted to get paid as? But he didn't want to be paid as a tight end, which I understood because he was split out a lot and utilized in a lot of different ways. Similar here with these guys, with Barrett and Bud Dupree. Edge rushers who don't do too much dropping in coverage, so I could see why they would rather be why they would want to be put as a defensive end, because there's more money there, and I get it. I definitely get it. Barrett has said that he wants to work out a long-term deal. Kenny Drake, as I mentioned earlier, wants to be there. They're not talking extension, but he wants to be there. But the Derrick Henry and that Derrick Henry and Chris Jones were the only two is telling, because they're not the biggest names that were out there, even though Derrick Henry could have been the Super Bowl MVP had it not been for a guy named Patrick Mahomes. Yannick Ngakoue, before I tell you about the big name that's really a surprise, has not signed his franchise tag, and just as recently as the day of, the Jaguars were fielding offers for him, and they had one that even included a Pro Bowler, but they weren't ready to pull the trigger on that deal. So there's still a chance that he can get traded, but they're playing with fire there. The one that's a big one though, Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. He signed his franchise tag. There's only a couple guys who didn't sign, but Dak signed his franchise tag, but he couldn't reach a long-term deal with the Dallas Cowboys, and reportedly he left the deal on the table for $33 or $35 million, $100 million guaranteed, but the money wasn't the issue though. It was the length of the contract. I believe Dallas wanted a 5th year, and he wanted a 4, so he could try to get back out into his. They wanted a 5th and he wanted a 4, or they wanted a 4 and he wanted a 3. Either way, he wanted a little bit shorter so he can get back into the market when the cap rises, and Dallas didn't want to do so. The problem with this one is that it kind of can create a rift. They that needs all the parts working together. Yeah, I'm not sure how you could not agree that that's football. So, I say that to say this, and I'm jumping the gun here, but I really want to get back to it because I know I'll forget. This could, and it's led Vegas to do some wild speculation, but they have predicted, whatever. Their odds favor the Indianapolis Colts to be the landing spot for Dak Prescott in 2021. I find that a little hard to believe because the Colts have Phillip Rivers now, but more importantly than that, they drafted Jacob Eason. Now, I like Jacob Eason. I'm not sure what his ceiling is, but I'm not sure that if I'm the Colts that it's worth going all in on Dak when I got Eason there that I can mold in the whatever way with Frank Reich there that I so choose. So it just seems like an odd kind of a gamble. But number two on that list, my beloved Chicago Bears. This one's interesting because, man, damn it, pull it. If that's what happens, that's what needs to happen. They are a second favorite to land him in 2021 if he is not able to reach a contract with the Dallas Cowboys, which not a lot, but many around the league don't expect to happen because of all that has transpired so far. That would be great. Okay, I am of the belief that the Bears will not make the playoffs this year. I think that they will look better, but I think they could end up 8-8 again. And I think that the defense will keep them from losing too many games, but the quarterback position will keep them from winning enough. And they'll be right back in the same position that they were this past offseason next year and possibly the year after that. And unless they draft well or somebody falls to them, but I just don't see them being able to draft somebody. If Dak hits the market, and I've actually talked about this when they were first having contract issues way back when. Come on, Chicago, brother. Listen, I will drive down to Dallas. We can make the trip back together, and we can talk about how many championships you are about to win with the Chicago Bears. That's pipe dream city, I know, but Vegas likes it. Vegas is never wrong, right? So just something to keep an eye on. I know it's speculation, but it's always fun to have these kind of conversations because, man, you just never know. On a less than a fun topic is that the Washington football team has gone under the microscope, and it's not looking good. Aside from having to change their name, finally, because of sponsorships being pulled and threats from stakeholders, there was an WAPO article released, which is interesting in its own right, but a WAPO article released alleging that 15 employees were victims of sexual assault and harassment in the organization. 3 minority owners have hired a law firm to aid in selling off their stake in the company, and Daniel Snyder has hired one to do an internal investigation. Ron Rivera, head coach, is front and center taking the bullet. Again, you recall with the entire Jerry Richardson situation that Ron was kind of front and center saying, we'll move on and we got to be strong. And he dedicated a win to Jerry, is now out and saying that, they're going to work through this and we've got policies in place now to make sure it doesn't happen. And my daughter works here. And Ron is just towing the company line. And it's tough because I do understand the trying to put on the brave face for the company, I guess, but at the same time, wrong is wrong, and you kind of have to call a spade a spade. In this situation, you don't even have to implicate Snyder. You can say there are some pretty serious allegations here, and while this process is playing out, we're just going to try to focus on football because that stuff all happened before he got there. That's what makes it so mind-boggling that Rivera is speaking up so prominently. And again, he's not, broadcasting, but he definitely tweeted out a response. He definitely had a response that was substantial. You weren't even there for any of it. You literally just got there. There's no reason for him to speak on, hey, look, that's insane. These are serious allegations. And I hope that this is resolved fairly and swiftly. Being that I just got here, I can only focus on creating a better environment for my players, for the staff, and for my own child who happens to work here. Like, it's not hard. It's really not hard. Somebody hired me to write your PR speech, right? I got you covered. Because what he said just didn't seem smart. But again, Jerry Richardson back in the day, not all that surprising either. Sucks, but it's not all surprising. And then lastly, man, we got to talk about this J.J. Watt tweet. There's a lot of uncertainty around the NFL season, which is interesting because they are the four major sports in America to get going. So in theory, they should have been able to have watched everybody before them and kind of have made their own way through it. Well, they're still dealing with a lot of uncertainties, and J.J. Watt took to Twitter or Instagram, I believe was an initial post, but he also put it out on Twitter with a list of things that are still being discussed. There was a call with about 50 players, top players, and here's the list. He basically said that there was a lot of stuff that, with a lot of speculation, so he wanted to put it out to make sure that everybody was on the same page with what the players were thinking. And so he titled it, Here's What We Know and Don't Know. We want to play. We want to be as safe as possible. We have not received a single valid test or response, infectious disease emergency response from any team or the league. We don't know if there are preseason games or not. They're still fluid on whether they could have 4, 2, or none. We don't know if there will be daily testing, semi-daily testing, etc. We don't know how a potential positive test would affect contracts, roster spots, etc. Nothing has been agreed upon regarding what training camp will actually look like and how the ramp up period work, where they kind of get themselves in game shape, like the third preseason game and that kind of stuff. But they want to play. He started to end it with they want to play. This goes along with what I've been saying the entire time. This push to return is from the money makers, and I don't mean people who are getting paid to go play. I mean people who are making money off of this from TV revenue. We know TV contracts are driving a lot of it. But banners, right? Signage is huge. They're losing a chunk anyway. Like I said, the NFL can kind of sustain themselves with this no fans thing, but the NBA and MLB in particular are going to feel it. It's not good. And with all of these things still so uncertain, I brought it up last episode. We so often look at these guys as athletes and not as people, and we're just go and play. You got to do your job. I do my job. Yeah, there's a lot of risk here. And the NFL, for all the time that they've had, apparently hasn't given these guys nearly enough information. That's a problem. That's a problem. Patrick Mahomes retweeted it and is on the same kind of wavelength as Watt, and as I want to say, if Jeff Darlington put it, this is kind of what they need if they want to force the league to do something different, because otherwise they're just going to keep on rolling. As we've seen, that was one of the first jokes I made about all of this, is that NFL is just going to keep on trucking until somebody stops it. They're not going to switch up nothing unless they have to. The reigning MVP tweeting out, yeah, bro, this is kind of a jangle. It's a big step. Big step. It's not where it needs to be, but it can't be ignored, and hopefully it'll bring in other guys to support getting better information. That's all it's about, is being better informed and knowing what the plan is, because I don't agree that, or I agree that they should probably have had at least half of that list knocked out, and that's not even including the we want to play that started and ended it. They should have half of that, a solid answer to where a guy like Watt, who was on that call where they're supposed to be discussing these type of things, would be able to have gotten an answer. They don't, and now we're having kind of a public display similar to baseball, but I think people were soured on it being public then, and they're going to be sour on it now, because with Watt getting out in front of it with saying what the players are looking for, which is just answers, kind of looks like the players are. And then you got the league trying to put, they a couple weeks ago tried to put 35% of the salary in escrow. Now they're trying to shave almost $2 billion. What was it? $2 billion, $1.8 billion, something like that, in salaries. Reduction to not have to feel the cap hit in future years, while the players logically want to spread that out. It's a messy situation. It's not close to being solved, but here we are. That's why I've been joking about the NFL just going to keep on rolling, because they clearly don't seem to care. Listen, until you make a stop or do it different, they just going to do it the same way. Let's go do it for this episode of Triple Zeros, man. Follow me on Twitter, Josh G. Buck, Facebook page, Clocker Sports, website, clockersports.com, email address, clockersports@gmail.com. Follow the writing. Read the stuff. Lastwordonprofootball.com, pippinainteasy.com, and of course, clockersports.com. Until the very next time, man, arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor, bro. Arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. Arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor.